Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back for this is our second session of our new program, Bold and Brave Conversations. And just as a reintroduction, Bold and Brave Conversations is a structured program that we've designed with purposeful discussions that are focused on having hard, honest conversations about breast cancer, about disease progression, and about the end of life. So the overarching intent of the program, or one of them, is certainly to empower survivors and their people, their unit, to be able to make choices that are right for them. If you missed our first conversation last month, we had a great conversation with Cynthias Sturgeon and myself and Dr. Geetha, a medical oncologist. Lots of good information regarding diagnosis and disease progression. That will be posted next week, and we would encourage all of you to view that if you weren't able to participate live last month. So we have received some great feedback from that first one with excellent questions to further our discussions, and so some of that feedback led us to tonight's discussion. It is a bit of a deviation from what we had planned originally. Some of it's going to be covered again in subsequent conversations, but it was apparent from the feedback that tonight's topic was relevant and needed now, and so we shifted, and so we're happy tonight to have a discussion from the partner's perspective. So I think that's a good introduction, and I'd like to provide a warm welcome to Brad Kregg and Dave Sturgeon. They are our partners who are going to relay their perspective, and we're going to have a real conversation about going through this process as a partner. So I think without much further, I think we will just so you get, this is really just a discussion, right? So we've got a bunch of questions that were submitted of significant relevance to what this program is, and so we're going to just go through it, and we'll see where the conversation leads us. So I think we'll just start out. There was a question that this question really is a great intro, because the scenario is that we go to an appointment, we receive very unfortunate and hard news that the cancer is spread and a cure is no longer a medical intent or possibility. So Dave and Brad, if you could please help us understand what is at the top of your mind, and what's the thought process as a spouse or a loved one when receiving that information and going through that visit?
Yep. For me, I have two young boys. They're 6 and 4 now. They were 5 and 3 at the time, and getting that diagnosis and knowing it was limited time, my first thought went to, how do I make it as easy for Julie, my wife, as possible? How do we get as much out of that time as we possibly can? And then how do we make the most of it for the boys to have memories with their mom? And it was just the positive side of, how do we make the most out of this time? Yes, it's a raw deal. Nobody wants it, but instead of focusing on what you're losing, how do you make the most of what you have left and try to keep it positive? And having little boys makes that easier because you focus on them.
Yeah, much like what Brad said, the first thoughts that I had more to do with what I could do to be supportive than anything else. The knowing who your partner is helps frame your thinking and helps you set the priorities for how you can be supportive. My wife is a person who turns to the last page immediately and tries to plan from that perspective. And so I knew that the places I needed to be were in the spaces that caused her the kinds of anguish or fear that would make it so that the time she had left was going to be less than optimal if there wasn't something I could do to help her support and focus on other things. And so that's kind of where I went, was being supportive.
That's a great intro, and as you guys are talking, I think maybe if we can, I'm going to back up just a little bit, and maybe it's useful if you guys can kind of explain your situation. Dave, currently going through these discussions in this process, and Brad,
right,
having previously been through it, I think just frames the discussion a little bit for everybody else that's not present in the room tonight. So maybe just a quick overview of what you've been through and what you're going through.
Okay, Cynthia was diagnosed with breast cancer on her birthday when she turned 40 in 2007, and we immediately went into the mode of doing everything we could to attack cancer and remove it from our lives. And that process worked for a number of years, and she was re-diagnosed with metastatic disease. And I kind of lost my train of thought, but our circumstance went from one of thinking that perhaps we had it beat and that we could, like several of the folks that we were able to meet and encounter and support through Project Pink, that actually lasted, that actually had a life that lasted more than 30 years. This was not going to be the circumstance for us. So where we're at now is that we've got a diagnosis that tells us that while the cancer is growing slowly, it's in her brain, it's in her liver, it's in her kidneys, and the diagnosis is, they haven't given us a definite time frame or anything like that, but it's a matter of where it goes next and how fast it goes, and it's anybody's guess as far as how long it's going to take. Right. So that's kind of where we're at.
Well, thanks for that. I know Cynthia, as we all know, has been really open about sharing her journey and her experience. So certainly hearing this from your side helps kind of complete that picture. And I know you guys, this journey has been in the many years time frame. And I know, Brad, that you have quite a different experience, and your journey was measured more in the months time frame than the years. And so maybe if you want to just give us a little idea of what you went through and what that looked like.
Yeah, so we got diagnosed in April 2019. And we started the same way you did. Positive, all these people that beat it, there's no option. Your only view was success in getting it behind you, and this was a bump in the road in our journey of life. And it was going that way, and then, I had surgery, stuff like that, and then she started getting a cough, and it's kind of weird. This is right when COVID was starting, so spring of 2020, and she started getting a cough, and it was kind of weird. We were actually hoping it was COVID, because we knew if it wasn't COVID and it was a prolonged cough, it could have been something else. Turned out it was progression of disease. So started some more chemo, which was different because during her first round of chemo, I was there the whole time, supportive, made the most out of it, lunches, things like that, and tried, had friends as a part of it. But she had to do that on her own because of COVID. I wasn't allowed in the building, so it was very different. And then from the time she was diagnosed as metastatic, that would have been like April of 2020. I lost her on July 31st of 2020. So it was a very rapid, very quick decline. The last 2 weeks, it was just like a blink of the eye. So, and, having 2 little boys at home, it was kind of a little bit different than some other people, but there's other people out there that have gone through similar things. So I just hope people don't feel like they're the only one.
Right.
Whether it's through other support groups after loss or whatever, there are other people going through similar things. And, I've found strength in that.
And I think intellectually, lots of people know that. Emotionally, feeling that and knowing that is a little bit different. So we're all hoping that this program and tonight's discussion in particular can help kind of bring that into more of an acceptable, encouraged conversation and topic to go through. And so,
Brad mentioned the fact he wasn't able to be there, and I know from my experience, the fact that while, as we talked in the green room, there's not anything you can do when you get a cancer diagnosis to fix it. But the circumstance that allowed me, when Cynthia was going through her treatments, I could go to everything. I could be either right next to her or just a few feet away, and she knew that I was there, made it feel like I was contributing to the cause, that I was, doing the kinds of things from a support perspective that allowed her to be strong enough to feel like she could get through it. So I don't know how I would have been a basket case going through it with COVID, where I couldn't be anywhere near it. It would have been really hard for me. I don't know how Brad did it.
You just do it. You find a way. But to your point, the first one, it was first round of chemo being there. We were out at Village Point. We made an event out of it. We invited people, so it was more that positive intent of always having, you're going to beat this because there is no other option. That's what you're doing. Yep. So, Kona, Pitch, Firebirds, any of the restaurants out there,
Yep.
I went out and got those for lunch. The nurses didn't want any. We offered. We asked, hey, do you want us to get you lunch? Things like that. We just made an event with it, and.
Good. So, I mean, I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you for being present tonight and sharing that, and we're going to dig into that quite a bit more tonight. But I think it's this is a great panel. Dave, you have a slower process through many years, right? Maybe an opportunity to prepare and have discussions and think about some of these things. And Brad, quite a bit more rapid progression, and you had young kids. And maybe didn't have the opportunity to prepare or think about or talk about as much as you would have. So we're gonna lean on Dave's current experience, and we're gonna lean on your hindsight and your past experience, and we'll try to unpack this for people. So Dave, you brought up actually the first question. What does it feel like to get that information as advanced metastatic disease and know that you can't fix it?
I mean, I think the typical response to that is you just feel helpless. And even though when I said before that we thought that we could get it, that we could beat it, there's always that thing in the back of your head that says, if it comes back, then what? And you try. Because we had years to think, both of us had time to think about it, but in terms of the way I processed it, I had time to think about what I would do, what I would, how I would act, what she would need, and that sort of thing. But there's nothing that prepares you for something that defines the worst case, at least in the way I was looking at it. It was a circumstance where you're devastated, but there's no way that you can allow yourself to be devastated. I mean, it's just not something that you allow yourself to, or in the way I was looking at things, I just couldn't be who I maybe felt like I should be. I had to be who Cynthia needed. So it wasn't that I was trying to be phony. It was just that I was trying to be stronger than I really felt like being. So,
and filling a need that at least you perceived needed to be filled.
Right.
For Cynthia.
Yep.
And Brad, from a totally different perspective. What are your thoughts on that same question?
You have that same helplessness, right? You can't do anything. But at the same time, you have to realize there are things you can control, things you can't. If you can't control it, somehow you got to understand that and realize it. But for me, it was always changing. There are things I can fix. And maybe it's not fixing, but it's making better, where it's just making her end of life better, whether it's moments, things like that. And it was tough during COVID, to be honest, but you focus on things you can do and you try to make the most positive impact, to your point, being the support system she needed or she needs, doing that. And for me, it was the distraction of the boys and making sure that, they were switching from a dual parent role into a single parent role. Yep. Where there are things where, quite frankly, I was deficient as a parent, but thankfully my wife complemented them. And I had to start focusing on how can I start filling those gaps on my own. So that was something I could fix, I guess, for that. And that keeps you busy. It just for me, the boys actually made some things easier because it allowed a focus. and it was the folks that had to be positive for them. So I couldn't dwell on a lot of the negative because I had to be there for them.
Right, and you said something really, I think profound, something really important to all of these discussions is that when we're faced with a situation that we can't fix, that's not a giving up, right? Because you can always make it better. There are things that can be done to make it better. Having these hard conversations actually makes it better. Avoiding these conversations, or even not knowing how to have the conversations, I think gets us into a place where the making it better is talking about the things that aren't going to get better.
You need to rip the Band-Aid off.
Right.
And that's when you can start. That's when you can start dealing with things. Otherwise, it's just going to fester.
Knowing the information we have, knowing what the likely outcome is, what can we do to create the story, your story, that is what you want, right? What are your goals and wishes, and how can we start to kind of peel that onion, so to speak, right? I mean, that's a hard thing to come to grips with. It's easy to say, right? I've guided lots of families through that. It's a much easier thing to say than to do, right? And especially coming from a spouse or a husband or a significant other perspective where maybe your role has been to fix things, right? And now you're faced with a situation that can't be fixed. That's a hard thing to my assumption is that's a very hard thing to overcome, having not been through it myself. I don't know if you may have already spoken to that as much as you want to, but
for those who know my wife, there's not a need for a fixer when it comes to Cynthia. The role that we played together in dealing with it was, and Brad, you mentioned it again in the green room kind of thing, as with you and your wife. We faced this as a partnership, so it wasn't you have to fix it for me or I have to fix it for you. It's how are we going to deal with this, and what's going to be the face that we put to the rest of the world, and how are we going to deal with it behind closed doors, and when we get it planned for, we'll live the rest of our lives until we're not here. So
Julie and I were the same way. It was everything. If there had to be tough choices, we made them together, whether it was how do you let the boys know, family know, how do you do all that, but we were always aligned on it, and we did it together. And if we disagreed, we talked about it.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, it really was her choice. It was my job, my role to support her, but we did it together, and we were aligned. And I think that support system, I know we feel like we need to be there for them, but they're there for you at the same time, which
absolutely.
is it's a weird thing that the person going through it without even knowing it is providing you so much strength to help you go through it. But you can only do that if you're doing it together as a team and you're having tough conversations. Because a tough conversation early on is a really tragic or difficult conversation you don't have to have later.
Yeah, and I know, Dave, you and Cynthia are very open about it, and I know you're open to the rest of us. I can make assumptions about how open you are with each other. So Brad, maybe more for you, but did you go into this situation with that? Did that teamwork, did that unit develop in part because of because of the diagnosis and what you're going through?
I think we were always that way. Whether it was, all right, what car are we buying? What house are we getting? How are we going to raise the boys? How are we going to, we always did things together. I mean, there wasn't, we were a group, and we just did it together. So we didn't know any other way to do it. Now there's some things where maybe we didn't talk about some things, but some of those were understoods, right? Like I didn't have to always tell her how much I was hurting. She just knew me, right? She knew that. But other than that, we were fully transparent, but we were always that way. I mean, from the beginning.
Good. So it was a fairly...
we didn't have to learn a new way to interact because of it. We thankfully had that. So it made it, easier, I guess, than it could have been.
So I think kind of staying in the vein of of bigger picture early on in this conversation. You know, one of the questions was posed is that how do you prepare for the end of life? How do you prepare to let go while still holding on, if that makes sense, right? So being present, being engaged, but beginning to acknowledge what the future looks like.
Right? You mentioned going, let's say in Cynthia goes to the last page of a book.
Yep.
Immediately. I'm kind of the same way. You prepare for the worst. You have a plan for the worst. That way, when the worst happens, you just react. You know, it's like training. It's like practice. You know, athletes do it. The military.
Yep.
When the bad, you just do, right? But you've got to be in the moment. So you can plan and say, all right, when end of life happens, here are the things I need to get done. But even if you don't do that, then identify what resources are going to help you. Funeral homes are incredible resources. I didn't know that until the very end. Hindsight, I would have involved them earlier on and planned some of that because some of the information they gave me was great. But you've got to be in the moment and just maybe tactically plan for the end. So when it happens, that doesn't get in the way, but emotionally, you've got to, for me, I had to stay in the moment emotionally, but tactically plan for the end. If that makes sense. You know, the financial
Absolutely.
side, all that kind of stuff, I had a plan, but emotionally, I tried staying in the moment as much as I could.
There are logistical pieces that you have to
Exactly. It makes it
unfortunately
easier.
think about.
Yeah,
and
if
plan
you can
for.
just pull the trigger when it happens versus having to think how you're going to deal with it. You know, what are you going to do with life insurance? What are you going to do with this? If you have that plan ahead of time, it makes it easier, but
Yeah, and
you've
if
got
you-
to stay in the moment.
And for us, if we didn't do that, it would have been, you know, the elephant in the room, the cloud hanging over you. I mean, we marched to the funeral home and early in the process and had talked through everything, got good advice. They are a good resource and had all of that stuff planned. So now we don't have to worry about that. I don't have to, and in addition to the things about planning for the end, Cynthia was open about talking about everything she wanted because of the life experience she had in dealing with family members of what they went through. So she was willing and able to talk to me about everything that she wanted. And it was, and she talks about it this way, it was a gift to me. I'm not going to make any mistakes at the end for her because I know exactly what she wants. It's just pulling the levers that she's already, determined are right for her in terms of the kind of care and what she's willing to do and not willing to do. So all of those things are done. It's not something that you're going to be worrying about all the time that you're trying to do care and everyday living. So that's done. And like you said, Brad, we've put that to rest. So now we can live our life. Now we can live in the moment. Now we can live until we die. That's kind of the way that we look at it.
That helps with other things too, with like family and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Like when Julie, passed, I had a sheet of paper. It said, "This is what I want. Memorial service only. And if anyone had any questions, like, look, here's Julie's handwriting. Here it is. I'm acting her wishes. That's it." So when you have those discussions, it's very easy where you actually have a documented voice of the individual. Now, on the financial side, Julie said, "You do what you need to." I talked through it. She's like, "You're on that." But the other stuff, she had it written down. So it was easy. I mean,
she had a
I was
plan.
following a script. Even like, all right, here's my Netflix password. Here's the Disney Plus password.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff was written down so I could get it on my phone for the boys.
Yep.
Just those little things. It's like she started nesting towards the very end and having all that stuff ready to go. So I just knew here's everything else.
Dave, you said something that I just want to augment because I think it's really important that these are all hard conversations, but they're conversations that matter. And the end result is a gift, right? I mean, it's a gift that's being given to each other, whether it's because making life easier after their passing because you know passwords and bank accounts and how to do that stuff, or a gift because you're not shackled with having to make decisions. Your duty is to now carry out wishes that have already been voiced, right? You're a surrogate decision maker. You're making sure that the goals and wishes that have been known are carried out and achieved. And so it is a gift, I think, in lots of ways, and I think that goes both ways. And I suspect Cynthia would probably say the same thing as far as,
Yeah,
you know,
we went into a process where, like Brad was describing, Cynthia, to varying degrees of completeness, we've got it planned for both of us so that she knows what I want, who I want doing what at the funeral, the songs I'd like to have played and that sort of thing, and the same thing for her. It's just like you said, it's just a gift. It's just, and going through the processes that lead up to the end, things like knowing whether or not the certain kind of treatment's going to be something she wants or doesn't want. I know I sat by myself thinking about, before we had all that completed, about what if she wanted a treatment and I thought that it wasn't going to be useful, and it was all of those kinds of things that that would be on your heart afterwards, wondering whether you made the wrong choice,
right.
are gone. There's, for me, the gift that I don't make a mistake in her treatment, because she's already decided what she wants and what she's willing to do and not willing to do based on the care. So
right.
It is a gift.
And I think that you just hit on probably the biggest gift, and the one I see a lot working with patients and families is there oftentimes is guilt associated with decisions that were made on somebody else's behalf.
Yep.
And if you know ahead of time you are carrying out somebody's wishes, that takes that off your shoulder. You're not making that decision. You're speaking on their behalf. You're speaking their wishes when they can't voice that themselves, and I think that absolutely is a gift.
If you could designate someone, I think, because when it happens, you may have that list, but still may be hard to execute. I was fortunate enough, I've got a sister-in-law who's amazing. So when it was time to start doing, she was there. We had, here's what the memorial service was going to do, and then she threw out the idea of a slideshow. Great. So she and I worked through that together, but just having her there as a sounding board, because I had spent so much time with Julie as a sounding board, but just when it's time to start executing, having that pre-designated person just to help you execute, that helped me a lot. My sister-in-law is amazing, and she was there for me to help me with some of the things. I know it was tough on her, but at the same time, she helped give me strength to help execute some of those wishes. So I wasn't scrambling. I already knew who my person was when time came to help me execute.
Good. That's great. We're going to come off of the big picture stuff a little bit and maybe get down into some more of the details. But I'm just going to kind of read these questions because I think they're thought-provoking and they'll stimulate good conversation. But did you and your spouse share similar beliefs and thoughts regarding planning for the end of life, and in any aspect, right? Whether that's treatment goals or the bits and pieces and the logistics that we were talking about. And if not, how did you navigate that in a timely manner, right? And the timely manner looks different between your situation and your situation. So, we kind of have hit on that, right?
We were pretty much aligned. It's kind of weird. She and I talked about a lot of things before cancer diagnosis, like just what we wanted in life and things. And so some of that stuff we were already aligned on and we already knew. But I think if it came down to tough decisions, ultimately it was her life and she was going through it, and I was going to default to her. But I think a lot of the stuff we were already aligned on with, like what the cremation or, the type of service, we had already aligned on that a while ago.
Even back that up a little bit in prior to the imminent end of life or after death. But as far as going through this process about treatment regimens and things that are offered and not offered, and some of that starts to get into quality of life and what we all define that individually and what that looks like. Where there's struggles, if you back that up towards diagnosis through through the first 12 months, or when you got the metastatic diagnosis and then the news that came with that.
I don't think so. Both of us were very pragmatic individuals, and we would ask the doctor for as much information as we could get the data, look at it, and then make a decision. we tried to make it, yes, there's emotional side, but in terms of treatment, we tried to make it as data-driven as possible, looking at quality of life. And we were fortunate. We were so aligned on what we wanted, and to be honest, it was her choice. The only time I would have ever stepped in to say, no, we're not doing that, is if I thought it would have had a very negative impact on the boys.
Sure.
Other than that, I mean, we data-driven decisions, and we didn't have many arguments.
What am I going to get for this treatment? That's the mantra. That was
what's the ROI?
What drove us? You know, Cynthia dug through every analytical thing there was on all the treatments based on what disease she had, and we talked about it ad nauseum. And like Brad, what are you willing to deal with? And if there was something I didn't agree with, we talked about it, but it was pretty limited as far as what treatments we actually did, you know, that I didn't 100% agree with. There were some things up front with the first diagnosis, you know, that I felt strongly about, that I didn't feel like she needed to do extra surgery or that sort of thing for reconstruction. Don't do that for me. Take care of yourself, get healthy, and then make the decision later, those kinds of things. But as far as the whole thing, like Brad said, it was a joint decision, but it was driven by what she wanted and what she got out of the treatments.
Yeah, and I guess my thoughts on that is that you guys have two great examples. There are people that don't want to know as much. There are patients, there are people being presented with diagnoses and decisions and treatment. There are some people that don't want to know quite that much. And there are some people that don't have the interest or the ability to be quite that data-driven. It's a great way, I think, to go through it. But I think, you know, in a different scenario, you lean heavily on your unit, whatever your unit is, right? If it's the two of you, if it's a family of 17, whatever that unit looks like, I think and the focus needs to be helping your loved one go through this, making choices that are going to serve them well. So we have a question that I think fits in anywhere, really. So could you hold that back up? I'm sorry, one more time. So we have somebody asking an idea of the cost of a funeral memorial service.
I can. The traditional funeral with a casket and burial and a plot and all that sort of thing, as recently as just within the last couple of months, and there wasn't anything extravagant about it, was $16,000. So.
Wow.
So yeah, and for us it was memorial service and cremation, so you don't have a plot.
Right.
And I think that was closer to. It was kind of a blur. We had the money, so it's just like, all right, write a check, do
Right.
it. But I think that was closer to $8,000.
Yep.
Significant any way you look at it.
And it didn't have a plot of land, but in our church we have a columbarium. So there's some ashes in the columbarium there, so that was part of it, but it was significantly less with the cremation and just the memorial service versus.
And there are resources, there are community resources, and I don't have that at hand, and it will come up later in one of our talks, but there are resources for people that don't have the financial resources to have that funeral and the memorial service with respect to dignity in the way that they would want. So we have a talk down the road where we have some social workers, and I think that that's an excellent time to kind of dig into that so we have accurate information, and we'll provide those resources as well. So this one we kind of touched on, but I'll say, do you take an active or passive role in communicating about diagnosis, about treatment, about goals and wishes? Are you a sounding board? Are you offering your opinion? I mean, I know that you guys are both working through this or have worked through this as a unit, and but maybe just a little insight into how you navigate that a little bit, right? Without being too, it's without inflicting too much of your personal wishes. And there's some topics we're going to talk about later tonight where that can maybe take a less than beneficial turn. So it is a balance, right? I mean, how do you navigate that?
Well, I would think it'd depend solely on who your partner was. And I've got a data-driven partner so I was a sounding board. I went and researched this. What do you think, Dave? Does that sound right to you? That sort of thing. But absent that, then I would think that you'd feel obligated to go dig as deep as you would if it was you. Yep. And get the information and then present that, and just the flip side of that process. So, but like I said, I was a sounding board.
But that's how your relationship is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. What is your relationship like naturally? And I'd go to that because that's working most of the time. That got you
That's
where
true.
you are. What is it? If you are the supportive spouse, but you're the one that does all the research, then do all the research.
Yep.
If you're the one that kind of sits back and something, do that. Play your role that's gotten you successfully to this point in your life and continue that.
We got another question. This fits right here, so we'll dig into this now. But how do you approach the conversation without having your wife thinking that you're giving up on her?
That's tough. I think some of it depends on, again, your relationship and your spouse to begin with, right? People are going to be naturally disposed to think different ways, and even going through, like after Julie passed, different grief groups, everybody grieves differently. Everyone goes through this process differently, right? And there may be cases there's nothing you can do. But then it's those honest conversations. Do you feel I'm doing this? Ask those questions. Because you may not know,
Yep.
Just ask those questions, but that's tough. I mean, it's human nature. People are going to gravitate towards the way they're going to feel.
Yeah, I think for us and the way that we deal with stuff, it has more to do with for us on knowing what your own life experiences have taught you about it. We talked about some of this stuff before cancer, so it was a matter of everybody's going to get something. Everybody's going to have these issues. And when I get to this point, this is how I kind of want it to be. And so bringing those conversations to fruition was just natural for us. And it didn't ever occur to me that having those conversations had anything to do with us giving up on her or whatever, because I certainly wouldn't have felt that if she'd have brought up that topic related to the kinds of things that are going wrong with my life, because as you get in your 70s and beyond that, things are going to break down and people quit worrying about whether or not they can fix you. They're just trying to keep you going until you get to the end. So it just wouldn't have occurred to me.
Well, and if you're talking about those funeral arrangements and those, and if you're having those, isn't it trying to make sure their wishes and what they want is implemented?
Yep.
So how's that giving up on a person?
That's exactly right. And
like you're continuing their life and continuing their wishes. So
right.
If anything,
I'm trying to be supportive.
That's the opposite of giving up on someone.
You're honoring them by talking about things that matter. They're maybe not conversations we were planning on having, but they're here. As a provider, as a physician who helps have these conversations a lot of times, I really I try to reorient that phrase of giving up because I just don't ever see that that's the situation, right? I mean, kind of to your point, we might find ourselves in a position where we are giving in because the disease has progressed to the point that's where it's at. But giving up, it's a shift in the focus of what we're doing and what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's maybe shifting from disease focus, curative intent, fighting this disease, but with and when the time calls for it, shifting that love and attention and care and energy, but not removing it, right? I mean, giving up feels like we're just going to shut the door, but it's not giving up. We might have to give in to the disease, but there's still lots to do, right? There's lots to do to make it better. To your point earlier, we can always make it better. That's a great question, and I'm going to come back to that one because I think it fits in a little bit. And another question, okay. So that's a great question. So what can extended family members do to help support loved ones and also the spouse and kids if they're involved?
So the kids, loved ones, whether it's church members, friends, family, whatever, just be able to take the kids. And so my wife did not want our home ever associated with her death for our boys. She was wanting our home to be a positive, loving place. So when it came towards the end, and it's hard to find room in hospice care in Omaha. It's not easy sometimes. My parents already said, whenever it's time, we'll take the boys, because she didn't want our home associated with the loss of her. She wanted it to be a happy place for the boys going forward. But you've got to clearly identify. I think we learned that early on when my wife first started going through chemo, is you've got to tell people how to help. But the only way you know is if you have those conversations, understand, what do we need? Do we need food? Oh, you can do Grubhub, DoorDash. What, do you need someone to watch the kids? Do you need someone to mow the lawn? And then identifying that and just giving people, because maybe the kids, you don't want anyone helping with that, but can someone do your laundry? Can someone mow the lawn? Can they do other things for you? So you can focus on the kids. So you need to know what you need and just be open with people and not be afraid to ask.
There's a question that we're going to come to that is associated with that topic, right? Recognizing that through this process, as a caregiver, as a support system, as a spouse, you do have needs. And how do you voice that or address that without feeling guilty that the attention is not on your wife, right? I mean, not taking that energy away from your wife, but also being open and honest and being able. I mean, the reality is, if you're not able to voice those needs, at some point, right, you're a less effective caregiver. You're a less effective support network because you're depleted. And so, I mean, it sounds like for you that extended family was very important.
You couldn't have made it through without him. But you've got to. I was at a grief group and someone was saying, well, this person's not supporting me the way I need to. Like, have you ever told them how to support you? It sounds weird, but you have to sometimes, especially if you got families that have not gone through this before, hopefully this is the first time for every family, you need to coach your family members on how to support you. They're not going to intuitively do it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with 15 lasagnas one day. Yep. Nobody needs 15 lasagnas sitting there. But you need to coach your family and your support network on how to help you most.
Dave, how have you worked with or without your extended family? Have they been a part of this process for you? Have they been a support network? I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes that extended network becomes a burden, right? And there's some things we'll talk about down the road too that addresses that. But
we've been blessed with a pretty extensive network, and we've got family around. We've been, because we're not in the situation that Brad was, there wasn't small children involved in that sort of thing, and generationally, it was not in my nature to ask for much help. And Cynthias, she went through treatment when she went through treatments, and just as an example, I used to meet her at radiation treatments at noon while she was working, and then she went back to work and I went back to wherever I was going, you know. So it was not asking for help and needing help. Just wasn't a big part of how we got through the journey. But here lately, there's been times when it's because of the circumstances that we're going through, it's been a real blessing to have people show up with food at some points, or offering to help with things that are important to her to get done. So people are showing up and helping decorate, or they're showing up and helping to clean, or they're showing up to help do whatever projects it is that she's got that means something to her based on what's going on in, in like Halloween or whatever it is. So it's been a sort of a late evolving thing for us to even let people in for that kind of help. And I know she's expressed at some points as, boy, that was a big deal for them to bring dinner, or for them to come over and spend 4 or 5 hours helping me do something that they don't have time to do for themselves. So
there is a gift in that as well, right? I mean, allowing people to get involved and to care and to help as much as you need or want at that point in time. So this next question is really, it's a big picture question, but what do you do if or when your wife says, "I just can't," right? And not in relation to anything in particular. Maybe it's in relation to another medical appointment. Maybe it's in relation to more treatment. Maybe it's in relation to something familial that's happening. But how do you support somebody through that statement and phrase?
Well, you can't take it personal. Yeah. You've got to, and it's situationally based on how you answer that, because there are certain days that she may say that she can't do it and she needs to be pushed a little, just because you know that she's still got the energy to do it, or she needs to do it for how she feels if she actually goes out and does whatever it is that she says she can't do. But there's other days when it's something that's important to you and she just says, "I just can't," and you got to be supportive in that. It's just a matter of reading the circumstances, but it can't always be the same thing. You don't want, I've never wanted her to feel like that she was wounded in the process so much that I don't treat her as a person. So sometimes she's right and needs a push, or sometimes she's wrong and she really needs a push. She needs to go do that, and sometimes she's right and we just need to lay low and take it easy.
In my experience, sometimes statements like that, while they might be in relation to this thing or that thing, fairly minor pieces, sometimes it's really the only way that conversation can be had, right? And maybe sometimes it really means, in the bigger picture with what I'm going through, I can't. And that's important to recognize, that maybe if that's, sometimes that statement is really, "I can't today, I'm exhausted." But sometimes that statement really is trying to open that door to have hard conversations like we're having, to really dig into what and the why, and what is that going to look like down the road. So I just think being open and aware of that, and maybe recognizing if that is where the discussion leads you. So also an excellent question that I have here later on down the road. So both of those we're going to get to, and I promise both of those are great questions. This one, I'm just going to read this one because this is a hard statement and a question, and one that we can try to work through. But our family is not all in agreement with my choices. They continue to attempt to persuade me that my wife is making wrong decisions. And additionally, that I am supposed to or need to be responsible for convincing her to change her mind. And how do you navigate that conversation? And it may not be something that either of you have really encountered. And so we might not have an answer for that right now, but.
I've got a perspective on that, and that is, and Brad and I describe our relationships pretty similarly, and that is that we are a unit. So that my perspective on anybody outside the two of us making life decisions are intruding in something that they need to take a step back and understand who the quote unquote injured party is here, whose life are we taking care of, whose wishes do we need to support, and those need to be followed completely based on the decisions that unit makes. So the way that I would have dealt with any of those kinds of things in any of the conversations that we had, and we've got family that have perspectives on life and that sort of thing, but I don't think anybody would have tried to intrude just because they know that we're a unit, we make decisions for us, and those just need to be honored. So it would have been a pretty hard line with us.
We would have been the same. I mean, it was our journey, but who's it about?
Yep.
This is their life. We're making this decision. You're either getting on board with us or you're not. You're either part of the solution or you're not. What do you want to be? Do you want to be the person dragging us down, or do you want to be the supportive person helping us? It's up to you. But it's like you said, it would have been a tough conversation, regardless of his family, friend, whomever. It would have been very difficult, and said, you're either with us and being supportive, or it's tough. But
I'm sure that Cynthia would have done. She would have had the conversations a lot more gingerly than I would, as far as that's concerned. But she helps me get better. So there are ways to deal with that sort of thing, because families, unless they're in an odd circumstance, they're trying to be loving and they're trying to make the right decisions. And in some cases, they're making decisions based on the way they were raised and the things that they believe and how things ought to happen. And that's hard to let go of, especially if it's somebody you love. So, the right way to deal with that would be to have a loving conversation out, but having it firmly so that, I respect, I understand, yep. But that's not an area where you get a voice. So.
And I've seen, I have seen from my position, seen lots and lots of families go through that. And in my experience, it's really based in fear. It's definitely based in selfishness, right? Nobody wants to lose a loved one. And so no. Are you sure you can't just do this or do this, right? And I think just like you said, refocusing. I mean, number one, this person is a grown, autonomous individual who understands the circumstances and is making decisions that's right for them. And so you don't need to be okay with them, but you need to support it, right? And if you can't be okay with it and you can't support it, then maybe you gotta be, taking a step back from the situation. Yep. But so Brad, this is probably good for you. So for kids involved, how can the extended family members address the topic and support for them, knowing that the end of life is approaching? And maybe how in particular did you guys go through that?
Well, I think it goes back to what we've talked about. You have those tough conversations. So you come up with the messaging you want for your kids and you share it with your family members. So it's consistent across the board. So your kids aren't getting mixed messages where one grandpa says this, one says this, an aunt says this. It's a cohesive single message to the kids. When Julie first got diagnosed, we were very direct. Mommy has cancer. We never used the term that she was sick because we didn't want the boys to think it was something they could catch. Right. Yeah. It was cancer. It was different. But then we had to say, it's back. Boys, it's not good. I don't think we ever really got into mommy's going to pass away. Because I think at their age, it's hard for them at that time, 3 and 5, to really wrap their head around what death is. Right at that age, kids use that term flippantly and they don't even think about what it means. So we never really focused on that. We just focused that cancer is back. Mommy was going to be going through treatment again. It wasn't good. Make sure you're nice to mommy and you spend as much fun time hugging and kissing and being with mommy as you can. Kind of we focused on it.
And I think there's another talk down the road where we'll dig into that more when we have resources available and people. That's an exceptionally hard topic, right? Yeah, it's a different topic for 3 and 5 year olds than it is for 10 and 12 year olds than it is for 18 and 20 year olds. But the language that's used, the approach that's taken. I mean, there are ways to do that really well. Are there resources outside of family or extended family that you leaned on that were useful in your experience?
Things happened so quickly at the end. It was through the hospice care trying to figure out counseling for the boys. Where do we get them? Just to have something to talk with, getting school involved and things like that, and just reaching out to get those resources. Trying to find that balance between being proactive and reactive. When you're dealing with 3 and 5 year olds, it's different, right? With an 8, 10, 12 year old, you can prepare them for it. How do you prepare a 3 year old for a concept they don't understand?
Yeah.
It's almost more reactive. It's kind of what we did, but who are the counselors, who to reach out to, that kind of thing. Dealing with their pediatricians for help with that, and most of that unfortunately was I to deal with on my own.
But as a family and with kids, it sounds to me like that was not a taboo topic.
No. I mean, I think kids are going to read into your body language. I think they're going to interpret it. So they're either going to interpret it the wrong way, or you can help them steer it to the right way. Because kids are going to notice something's wrong. All of a sudden, mommy doesn't have hair, or mommy's got bigger bags under her eyes, or mommy's limping, or whatever. Kids notice that, so you might as well get in front of it and own that conversation with them so they can process it more effectively.
I've worked with families who took a different approach, not as a judgment, but as an observation, and they didn't have those conversations, right? It wasn't because their perspective was, I'm protecting my kids from that. And I think the downside, one of many downsides to that approach is there is no preparation, right? However, a 3-year-old can prepare for that. But not talking about it, not approaching it, all of a sudden it just happens one day. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways to go through that, but there's also lots of help to go through that. And because you're right, like you were saying, lots of the resources that you used were after death. There are some resources and some assistance that are useful to kind of prepare for that journey, right? That preemptive grief part, and we'll talk about that in subsequent talks. But this is great for both of you, do either of you ever worry that you aren't supporting your wife in the way that she needs or that she needed?
My wife was always pretty clear with what she needed, and I'd ask. It's a combination. I mean, we've talked, it's that you keep saying the unit, we work together, you communicate. Either you need to say how you need help, or the other person needs to ask, one or the other, and that's how we did it.
Are there things that surprised you as far as the support that she needed or that Cynthia needs? Things that, I'm trying to think about the people that are listening and watching us go through this conversation and taking notes. And every relationship is different, and there are units that don't function in the way that you guys have. And are there things that you could have, that took you by surprise? Maybe things that you could have prepared for. In hindsight, that's an easy question, right? But there may not be.
I was surprised how much of the support is simply just being present, just being there in the moment. I think that people think support and they think doing. It's kind of that fix it question earlier. Yep. Doing, trying to fix, and sometimes just be there. That surprised me, how much of it was just that.
I think we've kind of hit on this. This is a question about choices that seem to be creating a divide among children, and my assumption is that those are maybe older children or adult children? Are there strategies or suggestions on alleviating the tension arising from this disagreement? Dave, that's probably more of a question for you, I would think. But
as far as an approach, everybody that is or was in our lives from the time she was diagnosed, we were, like Brad described, we were always upfront with what and how and what our approach was going to be, and that communication seemed to diffuse anything as far as disagreements or not understanding or why are you doing what you're doing. We didn't run into that sort of thing to my memory anyway, as far as issues with family.
I think what you guys are both describing is a family and a unit and a team that hasn't or didn't treat this topic as taboo, right? As something we don't talk about. And I know from my experience, the families that don't talk about it, and sometimes it's talking, like you alluded to earlier, these, some units, these are conversations that you have even before there's a diagnosis that they're relevant to. And there are some families that even after diagnosis and even through disease progression, they do not have the conversations. But what I'm picking up on is you guys are both in the category of having open, frank discussions. And I, in my experience, that leads to better outcomes. It makes sure that, or it helps us make sure, go down a path where we're able to, one, really importantly, learn what their goals are. What are your goals and wishes, right? Whether they're medical, whether they're emotional, whether they're, whatever those are, the more that those are talked about, the better that they can be worked towards achieving. And it's that open conversation and the ability to sit and have those conversations, I think, is really meaningful. You guys are both good examples of that. We talked about how you've talked about end of life with your kids, and it sounds like lots of that was because of the time frame happened, after death. Grandkids present a different situation and scenario, and I don't know, Dave, if you can speak to that part at all. I mean, again, we're talking about family units that we're getting to know are pretty solid and open, but that's a different world to navigate as well.
We've got grandkids that range from just a few months to 24 years old, so they kind of run the gamut, and to be honest, at this point, clearly the 24-year-old is aware and has been in on all of the progress of the whole disease. The younger kids are aware that Cynthia has, and we've talked to them, or their parents have talked to them about the fact that they're aware that Cynthia has cancer. And here just recently, they lost another grandmother, and the awareness is coming to the 12 and 10-year-old that, wait a minute, this happened over here, what's happening over here? And we haven't, because of the newness of some of the circumstances of Cynthia's disease, we haven't updated and had further conversations with some of them about just exactly what they can expect next. And we're still in conversations ourselves about what to tell them and how part of it's going to be driven by the diagnosis that we continue to get. But again, we haven't hidden it from any of them they know the disease is there. We're just not at a point yet where we've had the conversation saying how imminent it is or isn't. So, and part of that's going to be in cooperation with their parents, talking to them about what they're willing to have their kids understand that, you know, when we know it.
Yep.
So,
did you, Brad or Dave, do you ever experience feelings of jealousy or frustration with how she wants or wanted to spend her time? And how did you get to a point of being able to overcome those emotions, being okay and understanding of her time and wishes rather than wanting all of that good quality time?
do we have to tell the truth?
No.
Oh my God.
Only one person will know.
Yes. Being the unit that we are, I just assumed that we did everything every day together. But I know that she is so energized by the relationships that she has, the relationships that she develops through the things that she does, and she does things that I would have never imagined. She's somebody that I met in metropolitan Dallas and doing IT technical work, and the last thing I ever believed was that she'd come to Omaha, Nebraska with me and suffer through winters and that sort of thing. But where she chooses to spend her time is amazing to me, in that she wants to go out and herd sheep with her dog, and she wants to spend time doing things related to craft work and that sort of thing that I would have never imagined and hadn't no idea until it sort of evolved. And she's involved in Project Pink, obviously, and her friendships with all the people that she's met in the community. And it takes a lot of her time away from things that I think would be fun for us to do. But there's no way that I could inject that much energy into her, because she loves all of those individual things that she does so much, and it brings her back to life so much that I got to take my jealousy and stick it, you know, in the back room, because I know it's better for her to be the person she is doing all of that stuff, because we still do the things that we do together, but she's got to be a well-rounded person. And what I've come to believe is that it's helped her fight it all off and have a better outlook and be a stronger person. And it's just been a battle that I thought I needed to fight, and I try to work myself through now in not being jealous and not having a reaction and that sort of thing. So it's been a struggle for me, but I understand what I should be doing. It's just not in my nature to be 100% there all the time. So
I didn't have a lot of those experiences because when Julie was diagnosed metastatic, COVID was kicking off. So we couldn't do things. I mean, it was really limited to if you want to have friends outside, socially distanced, because that's when COVID was just starting. Mm-hmm. So that kind of stuff. But there was never any sense of jealousy, because with the exception of her hanging outside with friends, there weren't options to go out and do things because she was still going through treatment. So
I think what you're hitting on is a theme that we brought up last time, and it's a theme that's going to come up every talk that we have, and it's quality of life, right? And you're talking about being well-rounded, and you're talking about supporting things that are meaningful and valuable to Cynthia. And I think, again, without open, honest, hard conversations, you don't get to know what that really is, and then how best to support that. So quality of life is really, really important, and it's not a topic that we gravitate towards naturally. So thanks for sharing that. I think hopefully this conversation is starting to help people unpack this a little bit and peel the onion. And maybe, I think the biggest thing that one of the things that we can get out of tonight is that it's not an isolating experience, right? I mean, it can be an isolating experience, but you're not going through it alone. You're not the only person that's gone through it. And I just think that those conversations help. Because a lot of what you've been through and you're going through is an unknown, right? And that's, like you said earlier, we make plans, we talk about things, but so that we have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C so that we can shift from one to the other without making emotional crisis-driven decisions. But it's really the best way, I think, in my experience, it has been to help address that quality of life issue is to plan for it. So this is an important topic. We're going to talk a little bit about the finances of cancer, right? I mean, the biggest side effect of cancer that is not talked about is bankruptcy, right? It's a huge financial strain, and it's not talked about. And when it is talked about, we don't always know the resources that are out there, and we don't know where to go from that. So, this question addresses that. And financially, the cancer journey has made a significant impact on our savings. My wife feels guilty about this, stating that it was all for nothing as she is dying regardless of the dollars that have been spent. She's concerned leaving me with additional financial hardship on top of the grief and emotional hardship. Do you have any suggestions on alleviating those concerns and how to navigate the future financial concerns?
I mean, to me, it's what if the roles were flipped? Your wife would do everything to help you and spend all that money on you for the same thing, right? Maybe try to help her understand that, but it's tough. I mean, there aren't any good answers for a lot of that stuff. I know if you have littles, we talked about this earlier, if you have littles, there's actually Social Security for little kids for a lost parent. And I didn't know that until Julie had passed and then talked to the funeral home. So if you have littles, there's things like that. That's why I said funeral homes are actually great resources for some of that information. But that guilt, if it was the other way around, your spouse would be spending all that money on you. I don't know.
And I think communicating about the personal finances that you have as a regular course of being married is an important thing, no matter what it is that you're going through now. But it needs to be something that you've talked about, so that when the surprises come up, that you know what your plan is and you can adjust together. The thing that you can do to help alleviate those kinds of things, and Cynthia and I have had these conversations, it's about, okay, here's our circumstances, and this is what we're going to do about it. And we agree that that's the right way to spend the money and what we're willing to do and not willing to do. So it's our decision. It's not you, quote unquote, wasting the money because you've got a bad diagnosis. That's how we as a unit decided to spend the money that we do have. So it's again that circumstance where communication and information sets you free. If you know what the situation is and you've made the decisions together, then there isn't the worry about whether or not you're making a selfish decision or a wrong decision, or it's just my fault. So
yeah, I knew about survivor benefits from Social Security, and I knew that I didn't know, like you told me earlier, that it's for each child.
Each child,
I mean,
yeah. So you've got littles and you're worried about that. That's what, like, I didn't know that until, so I had all my planning in my head with, all right, what life insurance do we have? What am I going to do? And started doing all that. And then I got that information from the funeral home, and the funeral home was, here's the number you call, here's who you talk to, here's the paperwork you want to have on by your side while you're on the phone with them doing it. So that's why I said funeral homes are great. It's a weird thing about that, they're a great resource for it. Yeah. Even the funeral home's like, all right, you're gonna have we're just gonna get you like 10 copies of death certificates because we know you're gonna need a lot. But it's like those little things, they're the experts. I wish I would have known that a little bit sooner because I would have had those conversations and maybe some stress would have been let go from that standpoint. And I don't know what everyone's benefits are, but it's like if it's something that can pay for 8 kids' childcare, that's a lot of money. I mean, every month. I mean, that's like huge in the budget. But
so you got great information from funeral homes.
Mm-hmm.
You met with funeral homes earlier on, right, in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Did they serve as a resource? I mean, you may not need the assistance that or the advice that they provided, at least at that time. But, what I'm picking up on is that conversation would have been great earlier than you.
It would have helped solve an unknown. And again, we've talked about data-driven conversations and just having that extra data point to relieve a potential future stress would have been.
Yeah, our experience was similar, even though we didn't need the same level of information on the same topics. The people that helped us do the end-of-life planning from a funeral perspective, the guy was great. I mean, personable, had a wealth of knowledge, willing to do anything, point us in the right direction. Here's what you need to do to talk to get that solved. And I'm sure that beyond that, the social workers at the hospitals and that sort of thing are another good resource of where the dollars are at that you can go leverage based on your circumstances. So,
and what bills you could let slide,
right.
What bills you can't let slide. So
That's
if you are concerned, it's like that kind of stuff. There's some things that's like, all right, do you need to hurry up and get this renamed with a death certificate, or is this something you're like, you can do that 6 months down the road? Like they know some of that stuff too, which is great.
Yeah,
that was really helpful.
The social workers,
for us, is the funeral home. I should have relied on social workers more, but we kind of did our way. But some of that stuff, it's like, all right, you don't need to worry about changing the name on your Verizon plan immediately. If you don't do that 6 months later, fine, who cares? But just helping you prioritize some of that was great.
Yeah, that's great information. I mean, last month we talked about a lot of questions that you should be asking your doctors. They have that information. They may not be forthright with it, right? And I would think same with the social workers. There's a lot of moving parts that they're working on. I think if you know some specific questions that you can ask them or the funeral director, they're great resources. Great resources. Watching someone you love decline physically is heartbreaking. I often feel that I should be doing more and that I may have feelings of regret and or guilt down the road. I need to continue to work due to our financial situation, so I'm unable to have any extra time to devote to her. Do you have any suggestions or strategies to deal with that?
It's tough, but I mean, you got to work, and my wife understood. I still had to go work, right? She got that. I mean, I think again, it's those conversations, having that, but just being transparent, talking about it. You're going to have those regrets, but you've got to realize too, part of your role in all this is keeping the family going so they can have those days, they can have those rough days, they can go, do that. And that's part of your role, right? Is help keeping the lights on and doing that. And I think my wife understood that.
Yeah, and I think continuing to fill the role that both of you know each of you has to fulfill in order to support the family. If you weren't doing it, that'd be a bigger worry than not. And I think, again, like Brad said, I think that's pretty much understood if you've been in any kind of communications about what your circumstances are. And also leveraging what Brad said, it's the being there that makes the difference. I mean, being there when you can, as opposed to avoiding it, you know. But if you got to work, you got to work. So,
Not being there, and I always Ricky Gervais' Afterlife. Saw season 1 while Julie was going through stuff. Took me a year before I was emotionally ready to see season 2. But there's a quote in there. Someone said, "What do you miss most? What do you miss doing most with your wife?" And his response was, "I miss doing nothing with them." And that's that whole thing, just
Yep.
being there.
Yep.
It's not going on a walk. It's end of the night. You got the TV on. You're next to each other. You're not talking, but you're just there. It's like those kind of things. It's just simply being in the moment.
So this next one kind of deals with caregiving and maybe some resources that are available or not available. But we don't have a large family or a group of friends to assist us. It's primarily my wife and I. I need to continue working. We'll have to do so throughout her end-of-life journey. We are both concerned about caregiving assistance and resources as she declines, knowing there's going to be a point where she needs care around the clock that I can't provide. Do you have suggestions or resources, things that maybe you had to encounter, things that maybe you've thought about encountering?
Like for us, because it happened so fast, we were fortunate enough. We did basically in-house hospice care because it happened so fast. Couldn't get into a facility, but the DNA visit nurse, they have a lot of resources to help you with some of that, and to try to find economic ways to get some of that stuff done, and also talked with benefits providers at my work. There's FMLA, there's things like that. What is paid leave versus unpaid leave, and just talking through that, and then all right, if it's unpaid, how does that impact your finances? But having those conversations, but there are resources out there. Like I mentioned, VNA, they were great for us. I don't know how I would have gotten through that last week without them. But I know there's other ones out there as well that can help you at least plan for it when that time comes around.
Do you have any thoughts?
We've used some resources in terms with with family members related to in-home care and that sort of thing. So certainly those services are out there, and like Brad said, the VNAs there and organizations like Home Instead are out and can provide that kind of care. The financial part of that is something that unless you're blessed with the funds to take care of that on your own, then you just need to go to all the places that you can find information, and again, social workers and that sort of thing, and try to get the support you need. But the thing I wasn't aware of until we went through some circumstances was just how many service providers there are and the kinds of care that they're willing to do for you, so that you can be just more of a person and they can be the caregiver while you're
and
going
that's a
through
really
some
important
things.
point. Rolled into being the fixer or trying to fix things and being present, and there are resources, and we're going to have a talk in a couple months about hospice and palliative care specifically, and what resources and private duty type of things that looks like, because there are resources that exist, and we should utilize them, and it allows the opportunity to be a spouse and a support network and not a nurse and a caregiver, right? I mean, while that's what we would all want to do, I've seen many times where getting lost in the details of caregiving, and you miss the opportunity to be a spouse.
And I got, from a personal perspective, that it's another gift I got from Cynthia was, here's the deal. When things get worse for me, I don't want you doing any of that stuff. And I, in my own head, had already planned, well, we don't need anybody coming to our house because I can handle that, But it was a circumstance where she talked me through the idea that having somebody there to do this stuff that I don't want you to do anyway, that'll make it easier on me and easier on you as well, and you'll get some rest, and we'll be more able to do this together. So
hospice is a great resource. You have experience with it. There's lots of agencies out there in town. I think in Omaha we have maybe 9 or 10. There are limitations to what they can do. You might not have seen those limitations as much because it was a short period that they were in, and usually there's a lot of involvement from a lot of people. But there are other, I think if it's somebody that is younger than Medicare age or has a private insurance policy, there are lots of benefits that those policies may not they may not advertise to you, but there are resources for private caregiving and things to provide assistance. Sometimes they're great policies, sometimes they're horrible, but that's certainly, if I had a private insurance policy, that's where I would start to see what are my benefits. Let me see what the starting point is. There's private duty. You can hire private duty nurses, which is rarely needed, very expensive, and you can hire homemaker services, which are non-medical, non-patient contact type of things. So there's a large gamut of what's available. We are going to talk about that because those are really important things to learn about and know. There's Hospice House as a facility if that were the right thing and necessary. There's other facilities in town that fill that void as well. So it's a tough piece, and to be frank with you, it is a part of our healthcare that is a gap. Right? We don't have great resources for this very situation, right? Where it's husband and wife, and maybe there is no family, or there's no family willing to be involved, or they're distant, across the country. But we're going to talk about down the road what is there and how to best utilize those. But there are situations where that gap becomes very obvious, and it's unfortunate. But I think that's important to recognize and acknowledge up front, so that again it's part of the planning process in my mind. So these are all, whether it's hospice, whether it's private duty, whether it's homemaker service, these are people you're hiring to come into your home. These are people you're hiring to care for your loved one. You should interview them. You should investigate. And I don't want to say investigate. You should research them. You should know who you're hiring to come into your home and provide those services. And so that can also be a very hard road to navigate. I think social workers are a great resource that it can feed you information and can lead you in the right direction for a lot of that stuff. So we will dig into that a little bit more down the road in future sessions.
And generationally, it's sort of a thing that would be a barrier at first thought. Again, it was something I wasn't that aware of the services or interested in even looking at, but our own personal experience with it is that if you do your due diligence and make sure you get the right people in there, you can get good, loving care that makes a big difference in your life.
Yep, I agree, and it makes that experience, again, if we can't fix it, we can make it better, and that's right. Those are great resources to help make that situation better. Good. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of after death, right, and what that looks like, and picking back up and carrying on, especially when you have young kids in the house. So can you provide some suggestions or strategies to help stay present and in the moment? I'll back up. This is probably a little bit before the end of life, but can you provide suggestions or strategies to help stay present and in the moment and avoid continuously thinking about worst case scenario, right? Or what the scenario we know is going to come down the road, and when is that, how do you stay present and provide that support and love and care while not focusing on the worst, but not avoiding it either?
So for us, it was you have the difficult conversations up front, so you don't have to worry about it. You already have your plan. You're engaged. You can be present. So then when things happen, you just know what to do, and you're not thinking about them anymore. That's what worked for us.
And leveraging Brad's comment, you also put things out there. You just you make it you make plans. You put goals out there, whether you're going to get there or not. Regardless, you keep living. You keep planning for Halloween. You keep planning for Thanksgiving. You keep planning for Christmas. You're going to do the things. You don't stop buying things that they may or may not use. You don't stop doing things that don't make sense if you think of it in terms of the long term and that sort of thing. But you just live as if it wasn't there until the end does come. It's just it's a way of being there and alive until you're not. I mean, that's the perspective that we've got on dealing with it.
Yep.
And sometimes it's a prod in both directions. Sometimes you have to just go ahead and do it, whether it feels like it makes any sense or not. But more often than not, the fact that you've got goals out there brightens every day. So what are we going to do today? We're not going to think about what's going on there. We're going to think about what costume we have to have, or what arrangements we have to make, or what airline reservation has to be made. Whatever it is that just keeps you flowing and going. So
Yeah, my wife did not want to spend money on things.
exactly.
But, you know, it's like, well, I'm not walking that much anymore, so I don't need, but do those things.
Yep.
Buy the new clothes, buy the shoes, plan the vacations. Do that.
Kind of goes back to the giving up thing. If you stop doing those kinds of things, I mean, it doesn't take long before the mind starts thinking about the fact that, well, yeah.
So after spending so much time and energy focusing on your wife and the cancer and the journey, how did you refocus your attention and fill your time following the death of your wife?
I mean, I keep bringing up my boys, but that kind of made it easy there for a while. Because in a 1 week period, or a week and a half, I had a son who lost his mom that was starting kindergarten for the first time. So I focused on that and getting him counseling, working with the school, so schools were aware. Schools send a note out to all the parents of the school so their kids knew, right, what Ben was going through. But then, all right, who do you guys work with? Counts, because they're school psychiatrists. Who do they recommend? And start doing that, and then having to find childcare for my 3-year-old. Luckily, like I said, my sister-in-law is amazing. They live in our neighborhood. They use one. They had an opening. Boom. I just went there. I was like, all right, I trust my sister-in-law. It works. I had the boys that I could focus on those things. Then after I got them figured out, then I could start worrying about, all right, what am I doing? But just trying to find that new groove and finding out what gives you joy as an, you know, so much of your life is focused on your family and stuff, but what is it that gives you joy, right? Is it, hey, I can't watch the Husker game or whatever college football fan or sports. Maybe I DVR and I watch it later. Is it something as simple as just find what really, truly energizes you and try to find a way to do that? And then taking it day by day, that's the other thing I think I wanted to fix. And I want to, all right, how do I get through grief as quickly as I can? It's like your body's going to grieve at the rate it grieves. Everybody's different. And there's no wrong way, you know, and some people feel that if they don't wake up every day crying over the loss of a loved one, that they're leaving them behind. That's fine. But everyone does it differently. You just have to give yourself time and things will happen. And then also, you're going to mess it up. You're going to make mistakes. Give yourself a little bit of grace. No one gets it right. You can't, it just happens. You're going to make mistakes in hindsight. You just have to accept those, learn from them, and do it. And I've always said you're not moving on, you're moving forward. And how do your loved one they're not going to want you to be miserable. You know, no one ever wishes misery on a loved one. So you got to realize that your wife is going to want you to be happy in life. You can move forward and have her be a part of that, you know, as you move forward, everything you do. So, I mean, it's kind of for me, that's what worked for me at least.
And my assumption is that that's something that developed in real time, right? I mean, was there planning with that in mind?
I mean, we talked, and then there's some conversations I found out after the fact she had with friends, right? You know, make sure you take care of Brad and the boys. Like, she had those things, right? because she knew that I would internalize things and stuff like that. But she and I talked. It's like, you and the boys need to be happy. I want to be a part of it, but you need to be happy. And being morose all the time isn't that. And it's different. If your kids are in middle school and high school, that's different than when you have little ones. I mean, my goal in life right now is to raise 2 little boys that become well-adjusted adults, right? If I'm always down and negative, that's not going to help them. They're going to take the tone. But we still talk about mom every day. Pictures are still everywhere, right? We still goof around about, oh, remember when mom did that? Or if they like something, oh, mom likes that. You know, you keep that positive. So she's always there, but it's always a loving thing. And that's the way my family's done. Even I've got a grandfather that would always, oh, for Christ's sake. And we'll be at Thanksgiving as a family. You can't have a holiday without someone saying that, thinking about grandpa, right? Same thing with the boy's mom. That's the intent. Always there. My 6-year-old, I think he gets it because he'll tell his little brother, oh, mommy's always in your heart, so you can always talk to her. Like having that messaging. So she's always a part of their life, but it's never a downer. It's always a positive thing, and that's what she wanted. So.
You know, Dave, this is a question that I don't know that there's an answer to, but how do you begin to plan for a life without your loved one?
To be honest, I really don't spend very much time at all thinking about it. A few of the things that Brad said, I know there are certain things that will be important to me, and not acting like she was never here that's just not going to happen. I mean, I'm going to want people talking about her, and I'm going to have things in the house that remind me of her daily, and I'm sure that in my desk I'll find the project plan from her that describes how I'm supposed to live and when the dog has to go out. So I mean, a lot of the plan will be taken care of for me. But in general, what I'm planning on doing is, I know the things that are important to her about what I do with my life in terms of the things that make me happy, like Brad described. I'm going to do those things. I'm going to do the things that honor her. I'm going to do the things that would make her happy if she was still here to see me do, whether that's, playing golf or traveling or whatever. I'm going to do those things as if she was here.
So these are, I'm just reading a question that I think we've probably already answered. But I'm going to pass on to what has been your experience in preparing for the end of life? Through disease progression, through imminent end of life, through the bigger picture of end of life. That's a bit of an open-ended discussion, or open-ended question, but are there things that you would have done differently, Brad, having already been through it?
Some of them went so fast. And second, to me, saying, oh, I would have been, I don't see a lot of value in second guessing in hindsight. You've got to look at the time, here's the data I had. Did I make the best choice with the data I had? I can't look at it with a new lens. Hopefully I never have to go through it again. So, it's, but some of it, you've got to be in the moment. You've got to find out what keeps you happy, because even if you're not even at that imminent end of life, it's still, you've got to be that positive support, and you've got to find a way to keep yourself energized. So it really comes down to what makes you happy. What are those things that when you're really down, what can you do as an individual to get yourself out? And, trying to find that kind of stuff and what's going to motivate you.
Yep.
Like you said, is it golfing? Is it traveling? Or have you already been told it's in a binder in a desk that's already going to tell you exactly what you're supposed to do? You've got to find that. And I'm finding little things that my wife had left, and things that, and in hindsight, she started nesting. And I think she wasn't laying on that. She knew it was getting worse than she would let on because she was so tough. But just finding those.
Are there I keep using interpret, are there logistical bits and pieces that in hindsight you would have done differently or would have done that maybe you didn't do? Things that you've learned about the resources or the process or the details that you would have found useful. And I'm really, like we're trying to talk to people at home who are listening to this and kind of trying to preempt some of those questions. But
I think the social workers you mentioned, I probably didn't leverage those enough because they're very good too. When you're talking about, is it private care at home? Is it home service? Is it palliative care? Is it hospice? They're very good at calling out, this is covered by insurance. This is not. Let me run your insurance to see if it's covered by your insurance.
Right.
Leverage that. And if you can do that ahead of time, so I think you said it, you can make a logical discussion or a logical decision without it being an emotional decision ahead of time. That helps. The other thing too is if you get to the point where it's too late and you need hospice care very quickly, unfortunately those decisions may be made for you if you haven't already made those decisions. And it'll become literally you are just picking the least bad option versus picking a preferred option.
Yep. Are there things, Dave, that you actively going through this are glad that you thought about, or again, I would say, if you could have a discussion with somebody who's not yet been in the position that you're in, or that Brad's been in, that you would say, here's some advice that I really think you're going to find value in.
Boy, that is. Well, the things that we've been through have been made so much easier by the communication that we've had about what was available and what we ought to do and how we're going to do it, that I certainly don't have any regrets with how we've done it, or the outcome's not what we wanted, but the relationship that we've got grew so much through the process. That it, regardless of whether or not I'm a finished product, it's made me a better person, I think, for the example that Cynthia showed in how strong she is, how she approached the toughest thing that you can go through in life, and that's knowing that your end is closer than you want it to be, and that there are all these things that can happen to you physically that are going to make you not who you want to be, or live the kind of life you want to live, and you get years stolen from you and all that. But the example that she set on how she's dealt with all that and how she dedicated herself to helping people on that same journey, there's just not anything there that I regret other than not just being a bigger help. I mean, because what she did and how she led us through this process has been great. I should have been earlier in plugging into some of the stuff that she was into, but beyond that, I'm sorry, I just don't have much advice for somebody beyond that other than just communicate and make sure the unit's working good and
well,
the process
I hope that this conversation we've been having serves as the advice, right? That, I mean, without listing specific things, I mean, I think the advice is have the conversations. I mean, I think if I could sum that up without having been in your shoes, the conversations are really important. And I think it's always a horribly sad situation, right? The event and the diagnosis and the process, it's sad. but it doesn't need to be tragic. And the tragedy comes when we don't talk about it and don't plan for it, and that I see people getting done to rather than done for. Right? There's a big distinction, and it happens frequently because nobody had a conversation. And so, we're talking about things like quality of life and goals and wishes, and like I keep saying, we're going to have talks on those down the road. But every talk we have hints at the same topics. We're going to come at it from a little different perspective. So that's what I take from the conversation that you guys have given us today and the conversations I've had in the past, is that I've watched the tragedy happen, and I know it's avoidable. And it's worse of a tragedy when I see it happen again, and I know it's avoidable. And so, the more that we can have this conversation and kind of pull this topic out of the corner and in the shadow, and acknowledge it's horrible and it's sad, but ignoring it and avoiding it creates a worse situation. And so, before I wrap it up, is there anything else, Brad or Dave, that you feel like we haven't had a chance to discuss that you want to make sure that we talk about?
I'll figure something out on the way home.
Yeah.
But it's the communication. I mean, that's tough decisions never get easier. The sooner you have them, the easier they are. The easier it's going to make everything else down the road. I mean, that was our key to everything, was being able to have those conversations. So there was no indecision. There was no ambiguity on wishes or anything.
Good.
I guess the only thing that we haven't brought up that helped us was the experience and the leveraging the comfort that faith brought to it for us, because about several years ago I started watching Cynthia every morning go to her reading chair and spend time going through the Bible, looking at the kinds of things that first were just questions in her mind, and then it just became a study process. And the example and the things that she did coming out of that helped both of us in terms of what we felt about our lives, what we felt about other people's lives, and the things that we ought to be doing to improve the circumstances in the circle around us has made us both better. So if I was going to give somebody, back to the point that you asked me earlier that I whiffed on, it would be whatever the religion and faith that you've got in your life, if you want to get through this process and you want to make it easier on yourself and easier on your family, then you need to leverage that as maybe one of the primary things that you hang on to, because it's a circumstance. When I think about end of life and I think about what's going to happen to me and what's going to happen to Cynthia, I know where Cynthia's going. It's got to be, it's going to be, in my life after Cynthia is going to be trying to be the best person I can be so that I can join her. So, because I know she's going to heaven.
Well said. It's been a great conversation. I thank you both for being here and getting as kind of raw as we did into your stories. I know that certainly Project Pinked thanks you, and if I could speak on behalf of everybody at home watching us, I mean, I think it's speaking, going back to gifts, I think what you guys have done here has been a gift, and one that's going to continue to kind of build and serve people in the future. So I think without anything from the people at home and without anything from you guys, I think we'll kind of call it a night. And again, thank you very much for sharing your experience and your stories, and you're helping people who you haven't met, and that's important. So,
Well, and thank you for bringing your expertise and the time that you devoted to this, because it is an important topic. So.
Let's see, I would make a pitch for the next one. I think, do we take November off? Okay, so we're back in December, and we would love your feedback between now and then, and if we need to pivot and shift into something that we didn't expect because that's what's needed, that's what we're going to do. So other than that, I think you can look on the website for the program that we have planned in the coming months, and thank you all for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.